If you have a Bible, we're going to be in John chapter 13. And if you're using an app on your phone or other device, I'm using the New Living Translation primarily this morning. And as always, it'll be on the screens behind me. In Matthew 28, Jesus commanded us to go and make disciples of all nations. And then he told us to teach these new disciples to observe or to obey all the commands he had given. And if you survey the Gospels, you'll find at least 49 commands of Christ. And we've been looking more closely at a few of these commands over the last couple of weeks. And today, we're going to look at John chapter 13. And we're actually going to read the whole chapter. So hang in there. You can just listen to me. I'm an excellent reader. Because I want you to get the full scope of what's going on here. So John chapter 13, starting in verse 1. Before the Passover celebration, Jesus knew that his hour had come to leave this world and return to his Father. He had loved his disciples during his ministry on earth, and now he loved them to the very end. It was time for supper, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything, and that he had come from God and would return to God. So he got up from the table, took off his robe, wrapped a towel around his waist, and poured water into a basin. Then he began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel he had around him. When Jesus came to Simon Peter, Peter said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" And Jesus replied, "You don't understand now what I am doing, but someday you will." "No," Peter protested, "you will never ever wash my feet." Jesus replied, "Unless I wash you, you won't belong to me." Simon Peter exclaimed, "Then wash my hands and head as well, Lord, not just my feet." Jesus replied, "A person who has bathed all over does not need to wash except for the feet to be entirely clean. And you disciples are clean, but not all of you." For Jesus knew who would betray him. This is what he meant when he said, "Not all of you are clean." After washing their feet, he put on his robe again and sat down and asked, "Do you understand what I was doing? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, because that's what I am. And since I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash each other's feet. I have given you an example to follow. Do as I have done to you. I tell you the truth, slaves are not greater than their master, nor is the messenger more important than the one who sends the message. Now that you know these things, God will bless you for doing them. I'm not saying these things to all of you. I know the ones I have chosen, but this fulfills the scripture that says, 'The one who eats my food has turned against me.' I tell you this beforehand so that when it happens, you will believe that I am the Messiah. I tell you the truth, anyone who welcomes my messenger is welcoming me, and anyone who welcomes me is welcoming the Father who sent me." Now Jesus was deeply troubled, and he exclaimed, "I tell you the truth, one of you will betray me." The disciples looked at each other, wondering whom he could mean. The disciple Jesus loved was sitting next to Jesus at the table. And Simon Peter motioned to him, asking, I love this, "Who's he talking about?" That's kind of how that went. Who's he talking about? So that disciple leaned over to Jesus and asked, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus responded, "It's the one to whom I give the bread I dip in the bowl." And when he had dipped it, he gave it to Judas, son of Simon Iscariot. When Jesus had eaten the bread, Satan entered into him. Then Jesus told him, "Hurry and do what you're going to do." None of the others at the table knew what Jesus meant, since Judas was their treasurer. Some thought Jesus was telling him to go and pay for the food or to give some money to the poor. So Judas left at once, going out into the night. As soon as Judas left the room, Jesus said, "The time has come for the Son of Man to enter into his glory, and God will be glorified because of him. And since God receives glory because of the Son, he will give his own glory to the Son, and he will do so at once." And then notice here, this is where we're going to key in, verse 33. "Dear children, I will be with you only a little longer. And as I told the Jewish leaders, you will search for me, but you can't come where I'm going. So now I'm giving you a new commandment. Love each other. Just as I have loved you, you should love each other. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples." Simon Peter asked, "Lord, where are you going?" And Jesus replied, "You can't go with me now, but you will follow me later." "But why can't I come now, Lord?" he asked. "I'm ready to die for you." And Jesus answered, "Die for me? I tell you the truth, Peter, before the rooster crows tomorrow morning, you will deny 3 times that you even know me. Today we're going to focus on this new command that Jesus gave. The interesting thing about the command is that it doesn't actually sound all that new. It actually sounds old, actually. We saw the command right there in chapter 13, and I wanted to read the whole thing because I wanted to make sure that you understood the full context, the full picture of what Jesus is saying, who he's saying it to, but also when he is saying it. These are among the very last words that Jesus would say or utter to his disciples before his death on the cross. Now, he would come back to life, and he would come back to them, and he would spend more time with them, and then he would give them his final words, his last words. But the last words someone shares before they die take on a different weight, don't they? We lean in. We want to know. We're curious when maybe somebody famous or influential, but the last thing they say before they die. And these are among the last words that Jesus says. He'd spent 3 years with these guys, basically 24 hours a day for 3 years. He taught them in large groups. He had taught them in small groups. He had taught them by perfectly living out everything he said. Everything he said, he perfectly lived. And so not only did he teach them with his words, but with his actions. Man, how amazing would it be if that was true for us, that we taught as well with our actions as we do with our words. And when it came to this new command, they saw him illustrating it. The image of their teacher, their rabbi, their master, taking off his outer robe and putting a towel around his waist and kneeling before them and washing their filthy feet, that image burned in their brains was still in their mind when Jesus says, oh, by the way, I'm giving you a new command. Love each other. It would still be in their mind when he speaks these words, love each other. Just as I have loved you, you should love each other. Now, the command to love is far from new. You can trace it all the way back to Leviticus 19, third book in the Bible, right? Love your neighbor as yourself. We know that one. They would have been taught this from birth. Love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. They knew these commands. They were far from new. But Jesus, in the midst of this dialogue, this teaching in the upper room, says he's giving them a new commandment. So what is it about this command to love each other that's so new? There's a couple of ways I see that this command is new, and the first one is this. The command is new because of the standard Jesus sets for it. We understand this. Probably one of the easiest ways we can understand this is we know that it is against the law to drive over the speed limit, right? So none of us do it because it's against the law. But the problem most of us have with it is that the standard changes, right? Ray's Mill is a prime example. At no point should you ever have to drive 20 miles an hour or even 30 miles an hour on this road. The kids should stay out of the road by the school, right? I just put the car in neutral and just let it, right? The standard changes. You're driving and it's 30 miles an hour and then it changes to 45 and then it changes back to 30 and I missed that sign. The reason that the command is new is because Jesus sets a new standard for it. This is a standard that was never given before. They understood the command to love, but they had never been given it in this kind of context, with this standard. The command from Leviticus was the same, but it wasn't. Don't forget the standard for the command all the way back in Leviticus 19. Love your neighbor how? As yourself. That was the standard. And that's a pretty high standard. If we're honest, loving each other as we love ourselves is a very high standard because we are big fans of us. We are. That's a very, very high standard. Treat others how you want to be treated. think of them as highly as you think of yourself. That can be hard to do. Back in February, we did a whole series on this, on love and how we love our neighbors. And we found that loving my neighbor as myself means a lot more than just like not cutting someone off in traffic because I don't want to be cut off. It's more than that. It requires me, because love is active. It's not just passive. It's not, I'm not going to cuss you out because I don't want you to cuss me out. It's active. That means I put the same effort into loving you as I put into loving me. So if I care about me having good food and nourishing food, then I should care and put effort into making sure that you do. And shelter and all the other things that I care enough to put effort into getting for myself. That is the standard. And that's a pretty high standard, because most of us go, wow, if I'm honest, I put a whole lot of effort into loving me. And I've got to love you like that. That's hard. But Jesus gives a new command in that there's a new standard for how the love is to be shown. It's no longer love others as you love yourself. Jesus is saying, love others as I have loved you. And at this point, they don't fully understand the depth and the breadth of Jesus' love for them. But they had already seen it on display for years. Time and again, Jesus loved in a way that defied human logic, that defied human nature, that even defied the laws of nature, right? He did this repeatedly. At no point was any of that about Jesus' temporary glory or fame. It was always to bring glory to God. So he ate with sinners. He forgave prostitutes and defrauders and adulterers. He touched untouchable people. He fed hungry people. He cared for poor people. He released tormented people. And time and again, he would urge them, don't tell anyone. Because it wasn't about this temporary, hey, look at me. His very human existence was sacrificial in nature. He was born for a singular purpose, to lay his life down as a sacrifice for the sins of all men. That defies human logic and human nature. And then he defies the laws of nature and comes back to life, raises dead men to life. So he put a towel around his waist and he washed the filthy feet of his disciples, including the one who would betray him. Judas doesn't leave until after his feet have been washed and after he's had a meal. Then he sends him out. And when he finished, and after his betrayer had left the table to do his deed, he says, and I'm going to paraphrase, hey guys, I have to give you a new command. You know the way you've seen me love? The way you've experienced my love? You should love each other like that. I know you've understood that you're supposed to love your neighbor and love him as yourself, but the way you've seen me love, I want you to love like that. That is the new command, because that is the new standard for what love is. This is new because of the way we are to love each other. But it's also new for at least one other reason. It's new because of what this love proves. Jesus said in the very next verse that to love each other in this way proves that you are actually a disciple of Jesus. This is how John understood this. For him and for Jesus, there was a disconnect between claiming faith or claiming to be a follower or a disciple and failing to love each other in this way. Like it just didn't make sense to him. You couldn't claim to be a disciple and not love in this way. This is how you prove it. John Piper says it this way: to be a disciple is not just to be outwardly aligned with a Christian church or a Christian movement or a Christian name, but miraculously changed by the Spirit into a person with a new heart of love for the Father and for Jesus and for his followers. It's new because of what it proves. This is what it looks like to be a disciple. You're going to have this miraculous, supernatural love for the Father and for Jesus and for other believers. And you might think that this should be a given, right? It should be easy to love other Christians. But I'm just going to tell you, after 42 years in the church, that's my whole life, I think the opposite is actually true. I don't struggle to love non-believers. I don't struggle to love unrepentant sinners. I expect them to act and live the way they do. And for what it's worth, most non-believers I encounter are pretty nice. I bet most of the people you know who don't claim Christ are pretty nice people. They're not hard to love. I expect them to live and act differently than I do. It's believers that are kind of hard to love. Why? Because we're supposed to know better. We're supposed to be better. We're supposed to be filled with the Spirit and living out the fruit of the Spirit. We're supposed to be walking with Jesus and becoming more like Jesus. But oftentimes we aren't. It's easy to love people who don't know Jesus because they don't know any better. But it can feel downright impossible to love people who claim Christ and look and talk and act and live nothing like him. There's a cognitive dissonance there. It's not computing, it's not connecting. But that's why the standard for the love is crucial. It's so important. I was talking to Jamie, our children's minister, about this on Wednesday. I was actually sharing a little bit of this message with her. And she said something to this effect. I'm trying to quote her. She said, I can forgive others because I have been forgiven of so much. And that, I said, I actually had my computer on my lap sitting in her office, and I said, hold on a second, and I typed that out. And I said, I'm going to share that because it resonated with me and it convicted me. Because I've been forgiven of so much. We can put up with a lot because we're a lot. And I don't know if you know that about you, but you're a lot to deal with. I know that about me. That's why on a daily basis, multiple times during the day, I look at my wife in amazement because I know how much I am to deal with. And she consistently does it with patience and kindness and love. We can put up with a lot because we're a lot to deal with ourselves. We can love because we have been loved. And here's the thing, that's the order. Don't miss this. Love always precedes love. Love always comes before love. It does. Nothing else ever motivates or produces love but love. Hate won't do it. Judgment won't do it. Criticism doesn't do it. Only love can produce more love. And that's not from me, that's from God. For while we were still helpless, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. For rarely will someone die for a just person. If you could find one, you'd probably be willing to die for one. Though for a good person, perhaps someone might even dare to die. He's painting it out like it's way outside the realm of possibility, but maybe if you could find someone who was really, really good, you would die for them. But God proves his own love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Love preceded love. It always does. And this is where the standard for the new command and what it proves intersect. God loved us first. God proved his love for us by Christ dying for us. And we prove our love for him by loving each other like that. Do I literally have to die for you? Love might require that of me. But it is far more likely that love will require me not to die for you, but to die to myself. To put aside my desires and my preferences and my convenience to serve you. It will require a death of my pride. It will require what will feel like a death of my self-love. It will absolutely require me to sacrifice my time to disciple you. Jesus gave these guys 3 years. And not 3 years meeting with them for an hour a week. 24 hours a day. Guys, let's be honest. Is there anybody, any other man on this planet you want to hang out with 24 hours a day for 3 years? He invested himself in them. Actually, if you look at the very first verse of John chapter 13, it said Jesus knew that his hour had come. He had to leave this world and return to his Father. And then it says this: he had loved his disciples during his ministry on earth, and now he loved them to the very end. Why did he do this? Why did he invest in them? Because he loved them. It will absolutely require me to sacrifice my time to disciple you. It will require me to give what God has entrusted to me to meet your needs. In case you haven't grasped this yet, you can't fake this love. This is not a surface level love. This is not simply enduring each other. This is loving each other. And so in 1 John, which the beloved disciple also wrote, he says, "Dear children, let's not merely say that we love each other. Let us show the truth by our actions. Our actions will show, or this love will prove, that we belong to the truth, so we will be confident when we stand before God." John says, "Dear children." In 13:33, Jesus said, "My dear children." Your love for each other will prove to the world that you are my disciples. Jesus said all the law and the prophets can be summed up in these two: love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. But then later in John 15:17, Jesus says, "This is my command." 49 commands, but he says, "This is my command." Love each other. Love each other. This is it, guys. That's the command. I got a little bit more, but that's the sermon. That's the sermon. There are many commands. Jesus wants you to know all of them and obey all of them. Do you need good doctrine? Yeah. Do you need a faithful ecclesiology? Some of you are thinking, I don't know what an unfaithful ecclesiology would be. It's your understanding of how we do church. Sure, that's important. Do you need accurate end times theology? Well, you certainly don't want to be left behind. There's so much to know and learn as you grow in your walk with Jesus, but you got to love. if you don't love well, I mean, if you figure it all out and you possess all the gifts and you teach or preach or serve like nobody else, if you give more than anybody else in the church, you're the top giver in the church, you serve every Sunday, every service, volunteer for everything, you attend more than anyone else, but you don't love? Well, the Apostle Paul tells us what that's like. If I speak with human or angelic tongues but do not have love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so that I can move mountains but do not have love, I'm nothing. If I give away all my possessions and if I give over my body in order to boast but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy, is not boastful, is not arrogant, is not rude, is not self-seeking, is not irritable, and does not keep a record of wrongs. Love finds no joy in unrighteousness, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. But as for prophecies, they will come to an end. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will come to an end. For we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when the perfect comes, the partial will come to an end. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. But when I became a man, I put aside childish things. For now we see only a reflection, as in a mirror, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I will know fully as I am fully known. Now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these